Continuing from where we had left off last time, Dhampir, Ixseed Race 12, had come requesting Sora and Shiro's aid, for they are about to go extinct. But Sora quickly refused them, for the fact that they are a troublesome race. They can only grow and develop by sucking the blood of other races through their fangs, and in doing so, other races would be afflicted with a disease. That's how they grow and develop, but they can also survive off of other bodily fluids. In other words, they are a cross between vampires and succubi. They are an R18 race, and Sora can see where any games with them would lead, so he flat out refuses them. But there is obviously more to the story, because as we know, Sora and Shiro plan to conquer Disboard. They can't let any of the races go extinct. They need to unite all of them in order to challenge Tet. So the story must continue. Before we see what happens with Sora and Shiro, though, we actually start off this chapter seeing what is going on with Steph and Ino back in Elkia. Steph has had the task dropped on her of establishing the Commonwealth of Elkia, incorporating the Eastern Union into Elkia and trying to make sure that everything is stable, which is a monumental task that Sora and Shiro dropped on her. And needless to say, she's more than a little bit frustrated. She has many problems on her plate with this grand task, but the main ones are two. Establishing the Commonwealth, first and foremost, figuring out everything and how to coordinate things, because even though Sora and Shiro did defeat the Eastern Union, even though Elkia did acquire all of the continental resources of the Eastern Union, Elkia can't quite make use of all the resources. They don't have the technology that the werebeasts have to be able to process all of the resources on the continent. And also, the Eastern Federation still remains the third largest nation in the entire world. And so, if they just willy-nilly established free trade, Elkia's economy would be completely crushed. So, well, there are some problems with that. And then, of course, the second problem that's plaguing Steph is that the monarchs of Elkia have been playing hooky for the last 2 weeks. They are nowhere to be found. It has been 2 weeks since the game against the Eastern Federation, which also means, in total, it's been 2.5 months since Sora and Shiro came to this world. It took 2 months until the game with the Eastern Union concluded, from when Sora and Shiro entered Disboard to the time that they took over Werebeast, and then it's been 2 weeks since then that Steph has been dealing with everything in Elkia. In particular, now that Elkia has obtained all of the continental resources, has reclaimed that territory that the old king lost, well, all of the nobles of Elkia are coming for a piece of the pie. They have been coming to the palace in droves, endlessly challenging Steph to games throughout these last 2 weeks. Knowing that Sora and Shiro aren't there, they think that they can easily take advantage of poor little Steph, the granddaughter of the foolish king. You know, the one that lost the territory in the first place, which the nobles didn't really object to, because, well, the old king lost their territory. They could just complain and whine about it all they liked, but they didn't actually do anything to stop it. Now that the territory is reclaimed, though, now they're raising a fuss, trying to get a slice of the pie, trying to get some of the spoils of the games. In other words, all these nobles want is profits and wealth without doing any of the work. They don't want to actually stand up to the Eastern Union. They don't want to stand up to the king. They'll stand up to Steph, though, to get something that they want, but they don't actually want to do any work. And Steph is obviously frustrated by this, thinking that the nobles are absolutely useless. And her frustration is only compounded by the fact that they've been challenging her so frequently in these past 2 weeks that Steph hasn't even had the time to properly sleep. So she is sleep-deprived, frustrated, overworked, and just not in a happy mood. Regardless of this, though, 2 weeks of constant games, constantly being challenged by the nobles of Elkia, and Steph has not lost even once. She's gone undefeated this entire time. Of course, Ino Hatsuse is there to support her, which At the beginning, he did support her with his werebeast senses, but it didn't take very long for Steph to start winning all on her own, employing strategies that she had just recently learned: card counting, palming cards, force shuffling, and even bluffing while playing poker. She has mastered all of these. Initially, when she first started playing, she thought of what would Sora and Shiro do, trying to imitate their style of play. As the sleep deprivation kicked in, though, she started playing as if her opponents were Sora and Shiro. But that also didn't last long, because in Steph's words, her opponents were just far too weak. Steph has risen in the ranks of humanity as far as the strength of a gamer. I'd say, in fact, that Steph is probably top 3 in humanity right now, at least as far as we know. I'll be making a video on that eventually, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that. But right now, Steph is crushing every opponent that comes to face her. Granted, she doesn't quite see it that way herself, because she's comparing herself to Sora and Shiro, the absentee monarchs of Elkia, and she's simply calling herself a flunky, someone who's useless. Ino is trying to reassure her, calling her the Duchess of Dola, saying that, well, she's the one who has been entrusted with Elkia at this time. In the absence of Sora and Shiro, she is the highest ranking person. She is a representative of the monarch. You know, she's a very important person, worthy of praise, worthy of that title. But her times facing Sora and Shiro are still burned in her memory. Ino realizes that comparing herself to Sora and Shiro is just such a cruel comparison, because Sora and Shiro are on a completely different realm of existence. Their strategies, their ideas, their ways of playing games, their skills border on the unimaginable. Unfortunately for Steph, that's just a level in which she cannot attain, and is all she has to compare herself to. Even in this current game of poker that she's playing against various nobles, she is able to go all in and force her opponents to fold. Which she gets incredibly angry at, that if you were just gonna fold anyways, then why bother challenging me at all? And then she reveals her hand. 5 of a kind. So obviously it's not normal poker. It was stated that they introduced wild cards. We don't know the exact rules or the exact regulations of the poker that they were playing, but presumably these wild cards allowed for 5 of a kind to be possible, because poker games normally only have 4 copies of every given card. Still, it was a hand that would have absolutely destroyed her opponents. And it's this type of thing that's been happening for the past 2 weeks. Time after time, the nobles would come to challenge her, Steph would ruin them, and force them to accept her policies, her compromises, and her ways of running Elkia. So they would only get exactly what Steph allowed them to. As well, Ino would be taking their memories, as per the rules of the covenants that they had set prior to the game. The same thing that the werebeasts had been doing when anyone came to challenge the Eastern Union for their games of Love or Loved 2, Ino was doing here. And that's because Steph was bait. Sora and Shiro are no longer here, so it's just the granddaughter of the foolish king that remains? Well, of course, all of the nobles would come running, thinking that Steph was easy pickings. It had been their plan. Ino had let the rumor spread that the monarchs of Elkia were no longer there, and, well, it worked like a charm. They were able to simply take advantage of all of these foolish nobles and have them fall and dance right in the palm of their hand. Steph was none too happy of that, of course, because, well, it just shows exactly what they think of her and her grandfather. All the more reason to crush them outright, though. And with their memories taken after every game, they can't pass on to the other nobles what exactly happened. All they know is that they lost, but they don't know how. And so, other nobles would still come running thinking that they would have a chance. Regardless, after 2 weeks though, Steph is incredibly sleep-deprived, to the point where she starts thinking that maybe we should just get rid of all the nobles in general, and then we could just establish our own policies and no one would be there to object. She's bordering on insanity at this point, wanting to enact a tyrannical rule. points out as much, and then Steph starts hallucinating that she sees Sora coming back to the castle. Her emotions are the flurry at that point, not really knowing how to react. She's angry when he's not there, but of course, given that she was ordered to love him by the Covenants, her emotions are always going to be mixed when it involves Sora, at least Sora standing right in front of her. But alas, he is not, and she runs headfirst into a pillar. At that point, though, Ino interjects and tells Steph that she needs to get some rest. All the while that this has been happening, Steph had been complaining that the monarchs of Elkia, that Sora and Shiro had been doing nothing but gallivanting around the Eastern Union and their animal girl paradise. Ino hadn't really had any objections to this, because there was no way he could refute that. Because after seeing Sora and Shiro, well, he can presume as much himself. Regardless, Steph does try to get some rest, and Ino is going to take over for her for a time. And this is where we cut back to the Eastern Union, where Sora and Shiro are, in fact, surrounded by animal girls, as well as the Shrine Maiden. And they are asking the Shrine Maiden the all-important question, Shrine Maiden, what is love? And of course, the Shrine Maiden has no real response to this, because apparently, over these past 2 weeks, Sora and Shiro have been coming to see her every single day to ask, nonsensical questions such as this, but also to challenge her to games, to help establish policy on the Eastern Union's side. They have in fact been working, while also playing, in the Eastern Union to establish the Commonwealth of Elkia, because it takes more than just policy on Elkia's side. It takes policy on both sides for this Commonwealth to actually work. And currently, the game that they were playing against the Shrine Maiden is an alternate world version of Mahjong. I've never played it myself, but it involves numerous tiles, making pairs, and other combinations to gain points and eventual victory. A game that the Shrine Maiden had only showed Sora and Shiro a mere 30 minutes ago. And yet, Sora and Shiro had already reached a skill level where they were completely and utterly defeating the Shrine Maiden. They had figured out very quickly the best strategies to utilize, and were able to just completely shut her out. They had established complete victory so quickly, to which the Shrine Maiden could simply just laugh. She had no response. She was outmatched in a test of pure skill, but she also asked Sora and Shiro how they were able to cheat right in front of her, which of course they respond in the fact that they didn't cheat. Shiro simply memorized all of the face-down tiles, and Sora simply grabbed the ones that he felt that Shiro would want. That's not a cheat, that is just intuiting what the other player would want, which by the Covenants is not counted as a cheat because there's no proof of cheating that could be put forward. And besides, the Shrine Maiden was doing the exact same thing with her werebeast senses. The game was played under the assumption that this was going to happen, that they were going to try to beat each other using the skills that they had. Sora and Shiro still resoundingly defeated the Shrine Maiden, and in doing so, as per the Covenants, they had 3 requests to make of the Shrine Maiden. The first was to create an itemized tariff schedule objectively based on both countries' interests. And upon hearing this request, the Shrine Maiden started to feel a little bit guilty. Over these past 2 weeks, in every game Sora and Shiro had come to challenge her in, the Shrine Maiden had been trying to get a leg up on Sora and Shiro, to try to claw back some advantage for the Eastern Union. But every time she was defeated, and every time Sora and Shiro would make requests that were in fact to the benefit of both countries involved. The fact that under the Covenants he made this request, objectively create this tariff schedule for both parties' interests. By including these words, the Shrine Maiden couldn't put in an advantage specifically for the Eastern Union. It had to be objectively for both countries. And as she looked over the policies that had already been created, it was in fact the case with all of them. Both the Eastern Union and Elkia would start to lose a little bit in the short term so that they could both gain and prosper in the long term. That being said, though, The Shrine Maiden also realized that Blank was doing it again. They were dropping all of the work on the Shrine Maiden. Their response simply, leave it to the experts, because, well, Sora and Shiro are gamers. They are certainly not politicians. Even though they can use references from their old worlds and from all of the books that they had read, or Shiro had read throughout her life, that they know how to establish working countries, working economies, and know what to request, they don't actually want to write the policies themselves, so they're gonna leave it to the experts. And, well, in this case, the Shrine Maiden, someone who was able to establish the third largest nation in the entire world in a mere half a century, well, she's the expert. She knows the Eastern Union inside and out. She knows the resources that the continent has, and, you know, it makes sense to have the Shrine Maiden do this. And so that brings us to the second request under the covenants that Blank requested from the Shrine Maiden. That being, let us pet you. This request was always included in every single one of the games that Blank had played against the Shrine Maiden. Sora and Shiro want to pet animal girls, and there is no higher animal girl than the Shrine Maiden herself, the agent plenipotentiary of the werebeasts, a race that breaks the physical limits of what is possible in Disboard. And they want to pet the Shrine Maiden. And as for the Shrine Maiden, she did lose, so she pulls her golden tails forward and invites Sora and Shiro to pet her. As we learned, and what we saw in the anime with Izuna, is that Sora and Shiro are actually very skilled at petting. And it's more than just, you know, being skilled at petting. There's actually a reasoning behind this, why the werebeasts are so okay with, you know, two humanities going around and petting all the animal girls, and why there is a horde of animal girls around Sora and Shiro at this given time. We learn a little bit about the anatomy of the werebeasts here. The fact that every single race on Disboard is born with spirits within their bodies. Every single race has the ability to manipulate the spirits within their bodies to some degree. Even humanity. Granted, humanity has so few spirits and is so unaware of spirits that they can't even detect magic or are really unaware of the spirits within their own bodies, so it doesn't really matter. But the werebeasts, although they cannot manipulate external spirits, which is actually what magic is, the manipulation of spirits outside of a person's body, they were born with the skill to be able to manipulate the spirits within their own body. That is actually how the werebeasts are so strong, how their regular physical capabilities are approaching the physical limits, and they can manipulate the spirits in their bodies to destructive levels. That's how they are able to break physics with their blood break ability. There is a trade-off to this, however. By being able to push their spirits so far, their spirits in their body are always in a state of disarray. Therefore, werebeasts are always in a state of discomfort, especially those who have the ability to blood break. And unfortunately, this is not an affliction that they can handle individually. They need assistance from an external source. And this brings us to Sora and Shiro, who are abnormally good at manipulating the spirits within the bodies of the werebeasts. And that is why Sora and Shiro are currently surrounded by a group of animal girls wanting some of their discomfort relieved through the skills of Sora and Shiro. But with them all present, that is actually preventing Sora and Shiro from getting to their third request of the Shrine Maiden. The Shrine Maiden assumes that their third request has something to do with their new guest, the little girl cloaked in black sitting on her knees in the corner of the room, looking a little bit depressed. The Dhampir girl, Plum. Sora tells the Shrine Maiden that after refusing Plum's request the night before, Plum had apparently reacted by going around the entirety of Kanagari and telling people of Sora and Shiro's skills at petting. And that resulted in what we see here. Sora and Shiro not being able to be left alone because they have so many people coming to see them. The fact is, there's even a line outside of Izuna's house that had formed, and so they request of the Shrine Maiden to use her abilities as the agent plenipotentiary to ask them to leave until they seek them out. Even though Sora and Shiro wanted the Animal Girl Paradise, it doesn't change the fact that they are shut-ins. They have social anxiety. They can't really handle all of the attention and are not comfortable with it. So when they feel up to it, they'll go seek out the animal girls. For right now, though, they kind of need the privacy. And so, with but a whisper from the Shrine Maiden, all of the animal girls disperse. And then Sora's expression hardens. It gets more serious as he's going to make his request of the Shrine Maiden. He asks the Shrine Maiden if she knows of the neighboring nation of Oceand, home of Ixseed Rank 15, the Siren. She confirms that she does, and Sora says good, because this request involves them. So Shrine Maiden, what is love? He asks that same nonsensical question again. The Shrine Maiden responds with even more frustration, asking Sora to explain himself, or unless he's looking for a fight, then she's game. But this is where we find out what happened the night before. After Sora had refused Plum, Plum started wailing, clinging to his pant leg, saying they have no one else to turn to. Both Dhampir and Siren are about to go extinct. They have tried everything they can and are now seeking outside aid. And the only ones they can turn to is Sora and Shiro, the two who have claimed that they want to unite all of the races on Disboard to challenge Tet. They are the only ones that they can turn to, because anyone else on Disboard, if they want any of the resources that Dhampir and Siren have, well, all they have to do is wait for them to go extinct, and they can just take what they want afterwards. And so, Sora asks Jibril to explain the relationship between Siren and Dhampir, because he doesn't actually know. And here is where we get the dumbest tale, the stupidest bit of true history that is known across the 7 continents of Disboard. The thing that everyone can't help but stifle a laugh at. You remember that fairy tale at the beginning of the prologue? Well, here is where we find out how it relates to the story. Siren and Dhampir are 2 of the races that were the most inconvenienced by the Covenants. The fact that they cannot do harm to other races. We already know about Dhampir that they can only mature by sucking the blood of other races through biting them with their fangs. That would cause harm to another race, and so the Covenants completely forbids it. Also, the fact that the illness that is passed on from the Dhampir biting another individual, we find out exactly what that is. Essentially what you'd expect from vampirism. Anyone who's bitten by a Dhampir gets the illness where, if they are exposed to sunlight, they just die. That is some of the worst downsides that I have ever seen. It's just like, yeah, you can just never walk in sunlight again, you'll just turn to ash. No ifs, ands, or buts, you just die. Now, during the Great War, that'd be quite advantageous. They could prey upon other races and just eliminate them while also serving their own gain. Now, though, the Covenants are putting a real thorn in that side. If anyone was to willingly give the Dhampir's blood through their fangs, by allowing them to bite them, they would be forfeiting their own life. And no one would willingly do that. But the Sirens, however, posed an interesting opportunity for the Dhampir. The Sirens were also negatively affected heavily by the Covenants. In fact, pretty much every race was negatively affected by the Covenants, except maybe humanity. But the most inconvenient races are Ixseed Rank 12, the Dhampir, and Ixseed Rank 15, the Siren. The Siren are an all-female race, and so, to reproduce, they need to prey upon the males of the other Ixseed. And unfortunately, in doing so, whenever they reproduce with a male, the male is completely devoured. So, reproduction for the Siren kills their mate. Not really something that the Covenants allows. During the Great War, they were a menace and could just kidnap and take the males of other races and reproduce that way. But unfortunately, that is no longer possible. And so, when the Covenants were introduced, the Dhampir actually had an idea. They proposed symbiosis with the Siren, because the Siren can only live in water. So, their nation of Oceand is actually at the bottom of the sea, an Atlantis, if you will. And at the bottom of the sea, you're not really exposed to sunlight. So the Dhampir figured that if they could live symbiotically with the siren, then all would work out. They proposed a deal where, in exchange for blood from the siren, they would go out and get males from other races, challenging them to games through their own illusion magic and tricks, to be able to bring them back to Siren so that Siren could reproduce. It would be a win-win. They had actually established a way to symbiotically survive under the Covenants, something that actually impressed Sora and Shiro. And this is where Jabril gets a wild grin on her face as she explains the stupidity of Siren. The Dhampir brought a game to Siren, proposing symbiosis. And Siren didn't understand what they were being proposed. And so they absolutely crushed Dhampir in this game. The result of the game being that Dhampir was now forced to assist Siren with reproduction personally, and the males were now forbidden to suck the blood of non-Sirens. In other words, they were now under Siren's thumb. If any of the males wanted to grow to maturity, they had to obey Siren. So essentially, the Siren were incapable of understanding that they were on the brink of ruin and that they were being given a good deal. So they were celebrating that Siren can now survive, given that they have Dhampir under their thumb now. Because Dhampir had brought Siren a game where they wouldn't use magic, and the intention was being that they would have a draw in the game, and thus the end result would be beneficial for both parties involved. But Siren just completely defeated them at their own game. We don't know what this game was or how Siren was able to beat them, but the Dhampir got absolutely crushed by these idiots. That being said though, for a time, they were still able to work out symbiosis. Because, well, they wouldn't have lasted long if the Dhampir males were all consumed by the Siren, devoured in their reproduction process, and Dhampir would have died out long ago. Luckily, one Siren per generation is able to reproduce while leaving some of the spirits of their reproductive partner. Because that's actually what happens when the Siren reproduces. They have to mix their spirits with the spirits of another male, and that's how they create their offspring. It's just normally, any other Siren, except for one, completely takes all of the spirits, whereas one per generation can take just some of the spirits, reproduce that way while leaving the male alive. And since there is one per generation, that Siren was set up as the agent of plenipotentiary of all of Ixseed Rank 15 and was put in place as their queen. And so, for quite a few thousand years, this system worked. Dhampir and Siren were able to survive. Unfortunately, though, under the rule of the current queen, this all fell apart. Because after reading one of her mother's fairy tales, she got the brilliant idea of going to sleep until her prince came to awaken her. And that was some 800 years ago. When she initially did this, the previous queen was still in power, but that queen has since passed on, and so the one Siren that is capable of reproduction without draining a male completely is stuck in hibernation, or rather, an ability called cry-burnation that the Siren possess. Similar to the werebeast's Bloodbreak, this is an ability unique to Siren, where they can apparently sleep for over 1,000 years. And so, since the current queen went to sleep, it has been 800 years since then. And the Dhampir are bound by the Covenants to help Siren with reproduction. So you can see where this leads and why Dhampir and Siren are on the brink of destruction. Because the Dhampir are down to their last male surviving member. There's only a single male Dhampir left. The Siren have devoured all of them, and they're still too dumb to realize that they are on the brink of extinction. The last Dhampir male, though, is still a child, has been unable to obtain the blood to be able to grow and mature, and due to that, well, is incapable of reproduction. And this is when Jabril puts the final nail in the coffin. The stupidity of the Siren Queen. She put herself to sleep to wait for her prince until the prince is able to make her fall in love. But how the hell is she supposed to fall in love while still asleep? This isn't Snow White. It's not gonna be, you know, true love's first kiss that wakes her up. No, she wants to actually fall in love, but she just puts herself to sleep. The sirens are idiots, to the point where they are looked down on more than humanity. Jibril obviously looks down on them, idiot fish, but even Izuna states that her grandfather told her that siren even make hairless monkeys look tolerable. So everyone looks down on sirens. Their stupidity is known throughout the world, and this is why. Because they are just that stupid. But they can be saved, and Plum extends on what Jibril said, saying that there is a way. The queen might be asleep, but she's still conscious. And so, the Dhampir have devised a rite that allows people to interfere in her dream. Plum then activates some of her magic, which causes Jibril and Izuna to immediately react. Jibril, with killing intent, pretty much teleports right in front of Plum, threatening Plum, asking what you're doing. You were able to approach my masters once, but I'll be dead before I let that happen again. And Izuna darts behind Plum, not activating her blood break, but still moving incredibly quickly. And she says, Grandpa told me if you sense Dhampir magic, get out of their line of sight. Plum is, of course, startled by this because she had no ill intentions with this act. She was just removing the illusion that she had on her suitcases. And then everyone all of a sudden notices all of the suitcases that Plum has next to her, which are large and bulky and look to be extremely heavy. Upon seeing that that's all she was doing, Izuna curls up, goes back to sleep, and we learn a little bit more about the extent to which the illusions of Dhampir can work. Sora and Shiro are a little bit confused as to why Jibril reacted this way, because, you know, as per the covenants, they can't actually do harm, but the Dhampir have the ability to warp perceptions and create illusions, to the point that the reason Plum was so exhausted when she first came to see Sora and Shiro was because she was carrying all of those heavy suitcases, which it seems like impossible that this small Dhampir could carry all of this stuff. But thanks to Plum's magic, she was able to mask her own perception of the weight of the suitcases. So she wasn't feeling it, but it didn't actually eliminate the weight of the suitcases. She was still carrying them all there. And so once she got there, she was completely exhausted afterwards, which is kind of insane to think about. They aren't Ixseed Rank 12 for nothing. Their magic is quite potent. Though now, after revealing the suitcases, Plum digs around for a little bit and brings out the proposed plan that she has. Since they have woven a rite to interfere with the Queen's dream, they have set it up like a romance game, so that you can enter the dream and make her fall in love. And Sora asks, well, what do we get for this, anyways? And Plum offers up 30% of Ocean's resources. All of the resources of that nation, 30% of them would go to Elkia, as well as friendship in perpetuity. Sworn under the covenants, that means Dhampir and Siren will always be friends of humanity. That is exactly what Sora and Shiro want. The thing that convinces Sora, though, is that Plum says, you can also do whatever you want with me, hence bringing all of her suitcases and worldly possessions, which makes Sora agree immediately, to Plum's excitement, until Sora heard the words that described the romance game. It is a romance game where the conditions of love are indeterminate, and all of the questions and conversations happen in real time. At which Sora looked to Shiro, they nodded in agreement, and said, sorry Plum, no thank you, try not to go extinct. And then we cut back to the current time where they had just explained all of this to the Shrine Maiden. The Shrine Maiden says, well, that doesn't seem like such a bad deal. But this is where Blank lets the Shrine Maiden in on one of their key secrets. There are only 2 games that Blank has never played. They would never succeed, and so they have never even tried. the game of real life and the game of real romance. The fact that this game is one where the conditions of love are indeterminate and everything happens in real time, that's just real romance. That's actually just romancing the queen. It's not an actual romance game where you can figure out the best multiple choice answer, the best answers to all of the questions and the different flags that are raised with different characters to raise their affection and, you know, eventually end up with them as your match. And so that leads to the question again to the Shrine Maiden. What is love? To which the Shrine Maiden starts pondering to herself, well, now that I think about it, I just devoted all of my time to the Eastern Federation. I don't even know myself. And so again, Sora and Shiro turn to each other, nod, and look to Plum and say, well, sorry, guess that's that. You're out of luck. Try not to go extinct. So now Plum has been rejected 3 times now, and is bordering on the verge of tears, saying that you haven't been listening. I came with a plan. We have a right that can make the queen fall in love. It's a guaranteed thing. We can make this work. And so Plum asks Sora directly, tell me someone who you think would never fall in love with you. And to this question, Sora answers immediately, anyone. Which stops everyone there in their tracks. Because he means it. He thinks that no one would fall in love with him. Unless it's sworn by the covenants, he doesn't believe a single person that exists would ever fall in love with him. Which the Shrine Maiden and Plum think that that's really sad. And it kind of is, but it's Sora's mentality. He thinks so little of himself that he thinks no one would fall in love with him. But regardless of that fact, Plum has a right that, she says, can make anyone fall in love. And so Sora's like, fine, I volunteer, and Shiro can be... But Shiro stops Sora in his tracks. The Shrine Maiden seems to sense something about Shiro as well, as Shiro's trying to come up with an excuse as to why that shouldn't be the case. Why Sora shouldn't have the love spell cast on him. Because, you know, she doesn't know what he might do under the love spell, etc. And so the Shrine Maiden, sensing Shiro's internal struggle, thanks to her werebeast senses, volunteers instead to have the spell cast on her with Sora as her love interest. And so Plum does cast the rite, and then tells Sora and the Shrine Maiden about the way to activate that rite. Simply for Sora to, well, cop a feel. And the Shrine Maiden, reluctantly, wishing that she knew about that before agreeing to do this, allows Sora to do so. And then immediately feels a skin-crawling sensation and looks at Sora like he's garbage, a loathsome thing, and starts muttering to herself, like, this feeling is love? Well, I guess I can't deny it. I guess I am truly in love with Sora, even though Sora's like, she's looking at me like she wants me to die. And this is where Plum puffs out her chest and is incredibly proud of what they have accomplished. Because love is indeterminate. It means something different for every individual. And so all you have to do is determine it, to arbitrarily define it for each person. And that is what that rite does. So now the Shrine Maiden recognizes all things creepy as love. And so, undeniably, at least according to Plum, the Shrine Maiden is now in love with Sora. But Sora obviously says, you can't really call that love, can you? Like, that's insane. And also, can you undo it? Because the Shrine Maiden's looking like she really wants me to die right now. And so, Plum is able to undo it, and the Shrine Maiden goes back to her normal self. It's like, wow, that was quite the experience. Completely glossing over the fact that she just about shattered Sora's soul. But then Sora raises the question, well, if you have this surefire way, why can't you guys do it yourself? And Plum reiterates that the current last Dhampir male is still a child. Although that Dhampir can alter perceptions, they can't make the queen fall in love with, like, a rock or something. It still has to be a male that has the capability to reproduce. And at this point, Shiro tugs on Sora's shirt and shows him something written on her phone. To which Sora looks at that and responds, So it doesn't have to be brother, huh? At this comment, both the ears of Izuna and the Shrine Maiden twitch. They realize something. Keep this in mind for later. At this point, Sora asks Plum, can multiple people enter into the Queen's dream? And Plum says yes, but I don't understand why you can't do it yourself. And Sora says, because I want to see if we can accomplish this without using the cheat. The cheats are a last resort. The Shrine Maiden scoffs, and Sora corrects her, saying that we will exploit everything within the rules. We'll use bugs, we'll use broken characters, we'll use tricks to win at games. But cheats are different. They are unbeatable cons that break the rules. And as he says this, he nods at the Shrine Maiden. And then asks the Shrine Maiden, hey, Shrine Maiden, can you swim? And he nods at her again, sending signals, it seems. And the Shrine Maiden says, alas, I cannot, but it's simple enough that I can just walk on the water. And so Sora turns to Plum and says, you know, I think we will take up your offer to go to Ocean and save Siren and Dhampir. And then turns to the Shrine Maiden again and asks her if she knows anyone cut out for this, emphasizing the words cut out. And the Shrine Maiden puts her hand over her mouth to hide a devious smile as she simply says, well, Ino Hatsuse. I hear that man has taken 30 wives, which is an absurd number, but you can understand what Sora's reaction to that would be. As we cut back to the palace of Elkia, as there's now a madman screaming among the palace, yelling at the old fart, condemning him for having too much of a damn life. Sora is going off on Ino, resounding to the point where Steph, who had finally been able to catch some sleep, was woken up by his yelling and rushed to see what was going on. Ino is completely unsure of what Sora is talking about, until Izuna pops up and asks her grandpa if he's a sex maniac, to which he has no response. He's taken aback by it, and then, again, accosts Sora for saying, what have you taught my granddaughter, you damn monkey? The entire exchange is pure gold. Again, I recommend picking up the light novels because it goes into much more detail than what I've even described in this video, and it's just, Sora's entire response to Ino is beautiful. Because Ino has taken 30 wives. He's, you know, lived much more of a life than Sora has, at least in Sora's mind. But then the Shrine Maiden walks out and tells Ino that we are to go to Ocean immediately, and we are in need of your skills at philandering. So the Shrine Maiden thinks the exact same way about Ino, which you can tell, even in the text, is just breaking him. Granted, it's due to his own actions. And the Shrine Maiden again asks him, we're going to go to Ocean, do you object? And he's like, well, no, I understand, Shrine Maiden. And then this is where Steph enters the room. And Sora, to his credit, compliments Steph and says, you look great. And then the Shrine Maiden comments that it looks like establishing policy in Elkia has been going well. Thanks to Ino, I take it. And Sora steps in and says, Ino was just there to help out. All of this was Steph. Sora had faith in Steph from the beginning. He knew that she was able to take care of it. Steph's expression changes at Sora's comment, seeing that he does in fact have faith in her abilities, and just in her in general. The Shrine Maiden notices this change, and smiles smugly, pushing further and saying, so that's why you were able to dally around freely in the Eastern Union. You're as cruel a man as ever. And Sora smiles smugly, saying again that they leave everything to the experts, and they can always count on Steph when it comes to politics. Besides, Sora and Shiro were more worried about another country trying to mess with them. That's why they left. Because, no matter how you look at it, the monarchs of Elkia aren't home. That is an obvious trap. You'd have to be stupid to fall into it. And Sora and Shiro could trust Steph to crush anyone who came to face them, because Steph has played countless games against Blank and learned every time she loses. They have faith in Steph's abilities, and Steph, now realizing this, is kind of a wash of emotions right now. And Sora to his credit, even goes further and scolds Steph, asking her why she took every single game that the nobles brought to her. That he needs her, and by pushing herself this hard, she's putting herself in dire straits. And then he thanks Steph for everything that she has done for them, which, as much of a scumbag as Sora can be, he genuinely does care about people and care about Steph. That being said, though, he then continues in his next breath and says, so, Steph, I'm sorry to drop this on you, but we're going to go save Dhampir and Siren real quick to acquire the resources that we so desperately need to establish this Commonwealth with the Eastern Union. So, Steph, can you sew? Which is an odd question that seems to come out of left field. And Sora says, well, basically, we're going to go to the beach and we need swimsuits. I'll give you the designs. But all Steph heard of this conversation was that, great, we're going to incorporate more into Elkia, meaning that her workload is going to increase again. And this is where the chapter ends off, which means that we are about to head into the No Game, No Life beach episode, as we are headed to Ocean. 2 out of the 16 Ixseeds, Ixseed Rank 15, the Siren, and Ixseed Rank 12, the Dhampir, are in danger of going extinct because of the stupidity of the Siren. And unfortunately, this kind of falls on the Dhampir as well, given that the Dhampir, way back after the Covenants were established, brought a game to Siren that didn't involve any magic. Now, I can't be too hard on them. They had to do this immediately after the Covenants were established, immediately after they realized that they were in danger of going extinct. Unfortunately, they didn't count on how stupid the Siren was. I'm guessing during the Great War, most of the races hadn't really had many conversations with each other, and so Dhampir, although knew about the Siren and knew that they could live symbiotically due to Siren not really caring about the affliction that the Dhampir would give them, because Siren don't need to expose themselves to sunlight. They can just live on the bottom of the ocean just fine. So it worked perfectly. The Dhampir knew that much, just didn't count on their stupidity, so that when they brought them a game, they just got destroyed. Because I don't know how many games the Dhampir or Siren, or any race for that matter, had played up until that point. Because the Great War wasn't really anything that they played many games in. Well, except for, the Flugel and how many of the other races they could actually hunt, but still. So the Dhampir got absolutely crushed by Siren and put under their thumb. And now, thanks to the idiocy of their current queen, which you also gotta wonder, if this story is spread widely throughout Disboard, it has to be known even in Elkia as well, so the foolish king still has to look pretty good in comparison to the idiotic queen of the Siren, who essentially, single-handedly, doomed 2 races to go extinct by just reading a fairy tale and being like, oh, I want a prince to come fall in love with me as well, and then goes to sleep for 800 years, leaving the rest of her subjects to devour the remaining males of another race, and once they devour the last male, they both are just screwed. No one else is going to come help them. Luckily for them, Sora and Shiro arrived on Disboard mere moments before they were about to go extinct. And honestly, I have my suspicions that this is why Tet chose this exact moment to bring Sora and Shiro to Disboard, is because he saw the potential future of 2 of the 16 Ixseed going extinct. Tet's entire game would be ruined. He set up the world so that every single race would have a race piece. There'd be 16 races, 16 pieces on a chessboard. Tet set this up perfectly, and 2 of them are just going to get wiped out. His game would become unplayable. He didn't want that. It wasn't necessarily that he wanted to save the world or save all of the people. He needs to be an objective god. He didn't want his game to be ruined, and he wanted someone to fix it. Sora and Shiro are those people. And also the fact that, Tet wasn't happy about his first loss, as we've gone over previously. But, as I mentioned, next chapter is the beach episode of No Game, No Life. if and when we get Season 2 of No Game No Life, this will certainly be a highlight of the season, I'm sure. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think of the first chapter of Volume 4 of the light novel. What do you think about Ixseed Rank 15? We were introduced to another of the Ixseed in this chapter, and oh boy, do they leave an impression. Let me know down in the comments what you think of them, what you think of the entire situation, and how you think things are going to progress moving forward. Again, if you've already seen or read the light novels, try not to spoil, but let me know what you thought when you were reading this for the first time. With that being said though, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to see more like it, make sure to subscribe to the Daily Flugel. And if you want to see some games played live, I also stream on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and would love to see you all there. With that being said though, I'll see you guys in the next video. Ashente.